to take us through the material. And as always, guys, feel free, ask questions, jump in. This is very much meant to be helpful for you and where you are in your casing. Okay. Thanks a lot, Peter. Off to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. Before we kick things off, let's do a very quick um, survey just to give me an idea of where you are in terms of your case preparation journey and how you feel today. And we will start momentarily. And while you're doing that, uh, just a couple of reminders. We're going to do a lot of exercises today, so I would encourage you to participate. And uh, maybe take notes because we're going to cover a lot of content, and usually you might forget things sometime later. Sounds good. All right. It seems like I see pretty much everybody completed the assessment, so we can kick things off. Level of energy is fairly high, and yeah, we have fairly mature audience today, and it seems like we can do a quick pause in the middle of the session. We're going to be laser focused on the case portion of the interview. We're not covering the other parts, as you can see on the screen. Today, we're going to be talking about brainstorming, or your ability to ideate, to suggest actionable recommendations. Last time, we talked about structuring, or your ability to break down complicated business problems into digestible work streams with a list of analysis. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about storytelling, which is probably the most important skill. That is where you can demonstrate that your business acumen, connect the dots, and generate insights. In terms of the math, every single case nowadays has a math portion to it. Last time I shared one pager, so feel free to revisit it. There are 4 formulas you need to remember: profitability, break-even analysis, payback period, and ROI. So those 4 usually cover around 90% of all math problems. And finally, chart reading is the most challenging skill, and a lot of times candidates struggle with it. So if you don't feel entirely comfortable with chart trading, it's totally okay. Don't be too worried. Make sure that you nail down these 4 first, and then start working on chart trading as a dessert. Brainstorming happens in the middle of the case. Sometimes you might have one brainstorming question, sometimes 2, but usually you don't go more than that. Very rarely you will have more. You might have a lot of follow-up questions and questions to continue the conversation that are not brainstorming questions, but the classic brainstorming questions usually will have 1 or 2. Consulting firms usually do 2 types of brainstorming questions. One is what I would call typical. Those 6, they cover around 60% of all brainstorming questions. And atypical, the other category. Those are random one-time questions that you probably will never see again. And they are the most challenging ones because it's brand new territory every time you have that question. The good news, though, is that you can nail down the 6 types of questions, and they will prepare you for 60% of your brainstorming questions. The most popular ones are risks, revenue, key cost items, and comparison. Comparison is when you're given several options. Should we expand our existing facility or build a new one? Should we launch a new packaging versus the existing one? Or should we bring distribution in-house, or should we keep it outsourced? So it's usually about 2 options that you need to compare against each other, or you have one option and you need to compare it against status quo. We will look into examples later in this session to give you a better idea. Synergies are not too popular. You will have it mostly in an M&A case. And the profit growth ideas are quite rare. maybe like 2-3% of brainstorming questions, but it's still important to be familiar with that. All right, so this is a quick overview. Today's conversation is going to be structured through the lens of those 6 most popular brainstorming questions. We're going to go one by one and do some exercises and also explore typical approaches. But before we do that, let's do a quick assessment. Please click the link in the chat and answer just a couple of multiple choice questions to see if everything I've mentioned makes sense so far. Let's give it a minute and a half, and then we will continue. All right, thank you so much for your answers. So let's look into them. This is great. The four most popular ones are revenue growth ideas, key cost items, as well as risks and comparison. And pretty much most of them, most of the participants nailed it down. This is an important one. You need to remember that almost half or 40% of questions are going to be atypical. Those are one-time questions that you probably will never see in any other case, in any other brainstorming question. And those are more art than science. You will need to improvise on the spot. Let's kick things off by looking into risks. And first, let's see what you would include into this risk assessment. Please click the link in the chat. You will see a list of options. And please select the risks that you would include into your brainstorming. Let's give it a minute and a half. Well, let's give it 10 more seconds. All right, thank you so much for your responses. Let's check it out. So the biggest misconceptions with risks is that candidates position risks quite often as analysis or as questions or areas to explore, while risks are problems, some problems that the client needs to address. So, for example, the first suggestion was how to raise funds to acquire the target. It's a great question. It will suit really well for your framework, but if you're in the brainstorming territory, you can reposition that as limited funds or lack of funds for this acquisition. Competitive response is clearly a problem that we need to keep in mind. ROI and NPV. So that is an area to explore. That is a metric that is good to calculate and keep in mind, but that is not a problem. The problem would be potentially low ROI or potentially negative NPV. Outbreak of plant disease is very clearly it's a problem that we can face on the operational side. Variability of harvest yield, it creates unpredictability, and it's hard to foresee what cash flow we're going to have in the upcoming years. Exit options by themselves, it's not a problem. Limited exit options or inadequate exit options would be a problem. And change the geopolitical situation, well, technically it is a problem, so you can put that as a risk, but usually consultants don't deal with four things: environment, legal stuff, politics, and culture. It doesn't hurt to mention that, but usually you would not go through those four areas in your case solution. Now, saying that, the intro will understand where you are heading towards, so it's totally fine if you mention those in the way they are. But if you want your answer to be polished, it's a good idea to focus on problems. So, um, before we talk about how to structure and what ideas you can suggest, just let's quickly revisit the assessment criteria. 4 ideas is usually considered as average, and pretty much every candidate can do it. If you want to stand out, try to suggest at least 7 ideas. That will put you in top 5%. You can provide a list of ideas. It's totally fine, but if you can structure your ideation, that will give you additional points, as consultants prefer seeing the candidates who think top down. You can suggest generic ideas. That will be all right, but if you provide case-specific ideas, that will be the best practice. And you can do that on the fly, which will be appreciated. But if you need time, 30, 40 seconds is usually a good a good time to spend. All right, so with that said, let's look into different options here. So one of the ways you can think about the structure is financial risks, operational risks, and market-specific risks. And we can explore each of them and put together some cheat sheet that you can leverage in other cases. So for financial risks, we might not have funding to acquire this target. We might have optimistic assumptions about this target's performance. Yeah, and optimistic assumptions might be exaggerated revenue or underestimated costs. You can elaborate on that if you want. In other cases, you might also have forex fluctuations. If you're talking about a different country, you might see potential cannibalization as a financial risk. But in this case, it would not be applicable. I will put a question mark. In terms of operational risks, we might have lack of expertise, might be the first asset we're acquiring in this domain, in the agriculture. So we don't know what we don't know. This target might have obsolete equipment, and thus it might lead to poor quality control. We might have outbreak of plant diseases. We might lose key talents after this acquisition, which will definitely become disruptive to our business. We yeah, I think those are the major operational risks. Some other risks you might consider in other cases might be delays, might be limited capacity, maybe diluted management focus, cannibalization of internal resources. You might see um, potential. Yeah, I guess those are some additional ideas. Not applicable in this case, but you can leverage them in some other cases. Market-specific ideas, you can break them down into two. You can talk about competition and customers. Let's start with competition. You might see market consolidation, which will increase competitive pressure on you in the long term, and thus it might limit growth potential of your almond farm. You might see a rise in substitutes. There might be some other nuts like cashew, like oats, some byproduct, no by some almond milk substitutes like regular milk, and you might see decline in milk prices, which will increase demand for regular milk, decrease in demand for almond milk, and thus cascade to decline in demand for almonds. You might sometimes you might see competitive response, although in this case it might be less applicable. So I'll probably put a question mark here. And you might see, yeah, I guess those are the major ones. And finally, customers. You might see just shift in preferences, just, taste changes over time, and people might be over almonds at some point, and that will lead to market decline and thus downward pressure on our sales. You might see sustainability concerns, and more customers these days are sustainability conscious. Almonds require a lot of water to grow, and that's not sustainable. So the more customers are aware of that and more sustainability driven, the potentially lower demand we will see for almonds. In some other cases, you might have product market mismatch, potentially loss in loyal customers. You might also see brand risks, reputational risks. So a lot of possibilities, but you don't need that many. 4 ideas will make you average. 7 ideas will make it fantastic. And typically you won't have a lot of time to put it together. So you will need to do that on the go. And that's why I would recommend to develop flashcards like the one you can see on the screen. Feel free to take screenshot and add it to your library. And over time, you will have more flashcards for different brainstorming questions. You can revisit them, keep them fresh in your memory, and thus it will give you more tools on how to attack new brainstorming questions. And you can mix buckets. You can have market and internal. You can have competition, customers as 2 different dimensions, and combine this into client-specific risk. So there is a lot of flexibility that you can, the way you can structure risks assessment. There are some typical pitfalls that candidates fall into. The first one we already covered when we talked about how to position risks. I would recommend to position them as a problem, not as a question. Having no structure is not ideal, but it is not a deal breaker. If nothing comes to mind, it's totally okay. Just go ahead with the list. If you need a simple structure, you can just have the structure as X and non-X, for example, financial and non-financial reasons. Having 4 ideas is all right, but you can boost it to 7 and that will be fantastic. And generic ideas is fine, but the more case specific, the better. All right, I hope this all resonates. Okay, we have a quick question here. Let's take a look. Um, can you be specific about the missing nature of expertise and key talent? All right, let's look into that. So I believe it's in relevance to lack of expertise. So our PE firm might have expertise in particular domains in energy, agriculture, um, manufacturing, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they would like to expand their coverage and they would like to add a brand new asset to their portfolio, like this almond farm. So if they don't have expertise, they might not foresee some roadblocks that are typical and that experts, somebody with subject matter expertise will anticipate. So you don't know what you don't know, and that's the potential risk if you don't have expertise in this domain. In terms of loss of key talent, when you acquire a target, you want to ensure the continuity of operations. You want to make it as less disruptive as possible. Uh, and if after the acquisition, the chief operating officer and some other key executives leave, that will be disruptive because you will need to find substitutes. Usually, to find a good executive, it's time consuming. It might take months. Um, and during that time, you would not have talent to lead the operations of this farm. So that's why they have the caveats to their agreements, usually that executive could not leave the targets until 3 years down the line or 2 years down the line, unless otherwise they will lose uh, bonuses from this acquisition. All right. Great question. Thanks so much for asking. And now let's do a quick assessment. Please click the link in the chat. Let's give it a minute and a half, and then we will discuss. All right, it seems like it's taking a little bit longer than usual. Let's give it 15 more seconds. Terrific. Thank you so much for your answers. Um, how can you exceed the expectations? You can structure, suggest a lot of ideas, and offer key specific ideas. In terms of connecting each idea to the prompt, um, it's if you feel strong about some contextualization, some interesting story around one of your ideas, go for it. But try not to do that for every single idea. Sometimes candidates get overexcited and start contextualizing every single bullet point in their brainstorming, and that takes way too long. Interviewers, they have around 5, 6 candidates in a row, and they have very limited window to work with you. So if you start take too long with one question, you might make the interviewer nervous. So that this is something to keep in mind. So your brainstorming should take 2, 3 minutes, and then you need to move to the next section of the keys. The same with including rationale behind each idea. Um, All right, let's talk about this. I combined those points in pairs, and so competition is a good area to explore, a good area to cover, but competitive response will be a problem, and that will be a risk that you should keep in mind. Uh, Increasing operational complexity is clearly a problem, clearly a risk. Operational processes, the way it's articulated, is not a risk. Like poor operational processes or outdated operational processes, that's a problem, that will be a risk. Inadequate sales assumption, I think everybody agrees. Customer preferences by themselves, they are not a problem. Shift in customer preferences is a problem. Product market mismatch will be a problem. For example, if you enter a market with a new product and customers don't need it, there is mismatch between the value proposition of this product and the expectations of the customers. And if that happens, that's a problem. And you might see low sales, for example. All right, I hope this helps. Let's push it to the next level and do a risk assessment exercise. Please click the link in the chat. It will take you to a Google Sheet, and you will see a section on the left. Please put your name in this section, select the corresponding tab at the bottom, and then you will see a problem. And please suggest some risks. You can use 2 buckets, 3 buckets, 4 buckets. You can, skip all the structure altogether. It just provides a list of risks. It's totally up to you. Make sure you don't do a framework. This is not what we are practicing today. Try to answer the question, what are the risks of accepting this deal? Specifically that question. Let's give it 3 minutes, and then we will quickly go through all your responses and provide feedback. Let's give it 1 more minute. Fantastic. Thanks so much for your answers. Let's check them out. So let's start with number two. Financial operational market. Awesome. Is biodegradable market big enough to justify investment? That's a great question. That's a great analysis. It will fit your framework. But we are talking about the risks. Risks are problems. So you might suggest potentially a small market, potentially limited opportunity. Um, Now, the question was about specifically the deal. So we're not necessarily entering the biodegradable coffee capsule market, but we're entering this deal. So you can suggest that maybe optimistic assumptions about the size of this contract. Costs to make biodegradable, right? So that's a great analysis, right? You need to so fixed, variable, potential capex, excuse me. But at the end of the day, it's not a problem. The problem would be if you have unexpected costs or if it's prohibitively high costs. So those will be problems. So I would say optimistic assumptions about the contract, it's a cash flow. And in terms of costs, you can say prohibitively high costs to produce or unexpected costs. Operational, do we have the capability to produce biodegradable pod? Again, the same comment. You can say that limited or inadequate or lack of capabilities, like production, specifically production capabilities. Expertise, lack of expertise would be the problem, but expertise itself, it's just a good topic to investigate. Are competitors making this? I guess I will just reiterate the importance to position that as not a question but a problem, and you can suggest that. And also, we need to think about this specific deal, right? Competitors might overbid us and steal the contract. So competitive pressure. If we fail or make subpar product, will it hurt? You can say reputational risks. Would this cannibalize our current market share by shifting priorities? Yeah, I can say diluted management focus. That's a good one. Is this a fad, biodegradable? Yeah, so potentially, yeah, potential shift in customer preferences. So that would be a problem. Absolutely. Yeah, I noticed that that's the major challenge for candidates on how to articulate specifically this risk assessment. With other assessments like revenue growth, it's usually quite smooth. Financial operational market, how will it impact variable? Yeah, pretty much the same idea. You want to suggest the problem, not the question. Since only one hotel chain wants this cake pause, will it cannibalize the demand from other hotels? Will it cannibalize the demand? Um, okay, it might cannibalize our production if we have limited production capacity. Let's say we're at capacity right now, we produce for everybody. And if we need to support that new client with a lot of demand, we need to stop supporting these clients, and that will cannibalize our production capacity. That's a fair point, assuming that we use the same production line for different types of pods. I would suspect that we might need a different production capabilities to build, to package coffee in these biodegradable pods, so I don't think there will be overlap. But I'm not an expert, that's a fair concern. Efficiency of making these pods. Yes, we can say poor quality control. That will be a problem. But efficiency of making it, yeah, let's measure it. Let's do benchmarking analysis. That's just an area to explore. Distributors of the raw materials for that. Um, yeah, you're suggesting a good area to explore, but that's not the problem. The problem would be limited supply landscape of biodegradable pods. biodegradable materials. Short-term contracts, so transportation logistics structure. So yeah, not sure what you implied by this. Transportation logistic disruption. Again, don't see how this might affect this contract specifically. Is market inclined toward these pods? Yeah, you can say like potentially limited appetite from customers or limited demand. Competitors. Yeah, we talked about that they might steal you this deal. All right. I hope it's getting a little bit um, more clear what is expected. Financial operational market, great structure. Is the customers willing to pay for it? Potentially, you can say low willingness to pay. What is the cost shift? Too high to do? Yeah, prohibitively high cost, as we've discussed. Operational capability, easy to incorporate into machines. Um, yeah, so potentially like questionable operational feasibility, or potentially highly disrupt, potentially, let's say, potentially highly disruptive implementation process for new production line, for example. Do we know the difference in making biodegradable or not? Yeah, that's again good to educate ourselves, but that's not the problem. The problem might be, I even don't know what problem that might be behind this. Okay, current and future customer preferences. Yeah, we talked about that. You want to talk about shift in preferences, brand reputation epoch if not included. Okay, brand reputation, reputational risks, substitution for biodegradable. Will the people be bringing their own biodegradable coffee, knowing that few hotels have biodegradable already? That's an interesting line. So you can say, yeah, limited demand, or potential like strong uh, substitutes and limited needs in this type of pods. All right, and finally, financial cost of pods compared to cost of non-biodegradable pods. Yeah, you can suggest like uh, prohibitively high costs. Does deal justify adding a biodegradable option? You can suggest potentially low ROI or like long payback period. Lack of expertise, perfect. Equipment not able to produce pods. Yes, you can say limited capabilities or lack of capabilities, lack of internal resources for R&D to create pods. That's great. I would suspect though that they will engage some third-party providers, some biodegradable pod manufacturers, and use that to package pods because they produce coffee. They might not produce the material, packaging material themselves. Uh, Market-specific preference. Do other hotels seem to be moving in this direction? So yeah, I don't think it will affect directly the deal, this specific deal, but it might open the door to new opportunities. So if this deal is a success and we see appetite from other hotel chains, and we already have capabilities, a credibility because we made this deal successful, we can quickly expand. But that's a different story. It's an interesting story, but it's not a risk. What is the brand risk if they don't switch to post? Yes, and the hotel can pull out of this deal in the middle of it, and we already had capex, so yeah, that's legitimate risk. All right. Oh, terrific! Thank you for your kind of words. It's great to see that this is helpful, and I think a couple of reps uh, might help solidify those. Um, the patterns and how you can convert questions into uh, risks. And those are some additional examples. Again, feel free to take screenshot to use this as another flashcard. Terrific. Let's continue and move to another one, revenue growth ideas. We talked about that last week, so we will quickly refresh memories. Let's do some crowdsourcing and see what you would suggest to include into this brainstorming. Please click the link in the chat. Let's give it a minute and a half, and then we will check in and see your answers. Terrific. Thanks so much for your responses. Um, so with revenue growth opportunities, you want again to be focused on actionable recommendations, not analysis and not areas to explore. So that's the main pitfall that I see among candidates. So marketing is a good area to explore, but there are so many ideas, actionable ideas that you can provide inside, like launching promotions, partnering with celebrities, doing loyalty program. So marketing itself is a little bit too high level. Better understand customers. That's a great analysis that will educate you on some pain points and needs, but that's not actionable to increase revenue. So that's just, yeah, that's not a revenue growth idea. Partnering with the delivery companies very clearly will increase your revenue. Do benchmarking is just one of many analysis. Introduce a vegetarian option. You are expanding your menu to new customer groups, and vegetarians are one of the largest ones. So it's yeah, are like just conceptually it should lead to increase in your revenue. New offerings mathematically should increase your revenue. Collect data is just an analysis. Expand working hours again, mathematically should lead to revenue growth. Customer service is a good area to explore, but you need to be a little bit more specific. You can suggest that we need to ensure our restaurants are clean, our food is hot and delicious, that we don't have any mistakes in assembling orders, that we don't have lines and wait time. Those will be specific ideas on how we can increase revenue. And product innovation, the same is a little bit too high level. If you can suggest specific ideas like launching plant-based burgers, that is what they would expect. All right, I hope this that gives an idea and helps refresh memories from the previous webinar. And as you probably remember, one of the ways to structure it is 4Ps, which stands for pricing, product, place, and promotion. And because this framework was designed quite a long time ago, which is half a century ago, I would recommend not mentioning 4Ps, but instead suggesting a little bit adjusted wording here. Instead of product, you can talk about value proposition. Instead of place, you can refer to distribution channels. And the last one can be marketing. Now, for each of these, we can put together some cheat sheet so that you can leverage in other cases. So we can start with pricing. For pricing, we can definitely increase or decrease prices, but we can also change monetization strategy and, for example, do pricing tiers and offer higher prices for organic food. We can do price discrimination uh, offering student discounts. We can do sizing, which is charging different amounts for different prices for different amounts. We can sometimes even do subscription in high foot traffic areas for lunches, for example, and we can do bundles and combos. In terms of the value proposition, we can do new offerings, and we suggested several points there. It can be new wraps, it can be new healthy desserts, it can be corporate catering services. So a lot of different options, and we can improve customer experience. We can expand working hours. We can ensure clean restaurants. We can ensure no lines and wait time, and some other options. Then distribution channels. So usually people confuse distribution channels with logistics. Logistics happens before the store, so it's upstream, and distribution happens after the store. So you already have your burger or your wrap, and you need to sell it to your customer. That's distribution channel. If you need to deliver ingredients from your warehouse to your store, that will be a supply chain, that will be distribution. Sorry, that will be logistics. So distribution channel, what we can do, we can open new stores. We can launch an app for pre-orders, like most fast food chains do. You can do you can partner with food delivery companies. You can partner with retailers to sell prepackaged food, like Starbucks does or Panera. So and finally, marketing. In terms of marketing, usually you can group them into three categories. You can talk about advertisement, promotions, and loyalty programs. You can double click on that and talk about TV advertisement, print, radio, billboards, local, national. You can talk about partnership with celebrities and influencers and etc. So there are a lot of options that you can provide there, but it's overall going to be advertisement. You can do a lot of different promotions, and loyalty program is usually a great powerful source for marketing in CPG and recurring demand products. So a lot of ideas, around 20. You don't need this many. To be average, you need just 4. If you want to exceed the expectations, you need to suggest 7. You can structure the way we did, but if you don't feel it, feel free to have a list of ideas. That is totally all right. But structure will give you additional points. Structure is the best practice. So this is how it can look like. Another flashcard for your library. You won't have time though to create this approach because you will have around 30-40 seconds to regroup. So make sure that you have this in your active memory and you can quickly access it and deliver a lot of ideas on the fly. Because usually when you do typical brainstorming questions, they should be polished so that you win more points and credibility for whenever you will do atypical brainstorming questions that are more challenging. All right, I hope this was a good refresher. Let's do a quick assessment to double check that. Please click the link in the chat. Let's give it a minute and a half, and then we will move to the next topic. It's taking a little bit longer. Let's give it maybe 20 more seconds. All right. Okay, let's look into that. Thank you so much for providing your answers. 4 Ps, terrific, perfect. Pricing up and down the price to influence volume, sizing, terrific. Pricing T is price discrimination, increase, decrease, offer, premium, and economic option. Terrific. Marketing, advertisement, e-commerce is going to be um, so when you say e-commerce, it might come across as if it's a distribution channel, like you are partnering with online store or online platform to distribute your products. So if you mean digital marketing, you probably want to say digital marketing. Distribution, new stores, delivery, that's perfect. Terrific. All right. I think we have a question. Let me quickly address it. So, um, I'm taking away that we should state should the options using an active verb versus asking it in a question. Correct. So when you ask a question, it's not actionable. When you suggest, it's almost like suggesting recommendation. Questions are great for the opening framework, and brainstorming is more about specific ideas. All right, we can move to the next question. Key cost items. I think we also touched upon it last week, so let's quickly revisit it. Please click the link in the chat. Let's see what you remember, and let's give it a minute and a half. All right, thanks so much for your answers. Uh, let's check them out. So commercial equipment. Commercial equipment is an asset. It's an investment. It's capital expenditure. This is something you will see in your balance sheet, not in your income statement. If you want to include costs associated with commercial equipment, it can be utilities, maintenance, insurance, leasing payments if it's an expensive piece of equipment. But commercial equipment itself, it's uh, it's an asset. Same with store buildings. It's a big cash outflow if you're going to purchase it, and that will be on your balance sheet, but that's not the cost. You could not use it to reduce your profits. And legal fees, technically, they are costs, but they're not key costs, maybe several $1,000s. So I would not include that as your major expense. All right. So typically you would think about fixed and variable costs. And on the fixed side, you will talk about rent, maintenance, marketing, overhead, transportation, logistics, and research and development. So in this case, grocery retailers, they probably would not have a lot of research and development. They don't create software products or hardware products. So that will be out. Um, but for other cases, you might have R&D included. They will need to rent. They have equipment like fridges, storage equipment, displays, and they might break down. You might need spare parts. You need to have maintenance crew to support it and pay them salaries. So that is going to be your maintenance costs. Marketing will be huge. It's a commoditized industry, so you need to stand out. You need to invest in your brand awareness. Overhead, it's all kind of central services, management team. Um, you will see their finance team, IT, etc. Transportation, you will need to deliver your ingredients, your produce from warehouses to your stores. On the variable side, you can talk about raw materials, labor, distribution commissions, credit card transaction fees, discounts, and export-import duties. So raw materials might include produce, but also packaging materials. Labor, you will have a lot of labor in stores. It's a labor-intensive business. So you will have cashiers, you will have cooking teams, and yeah, that will be your variable cost. Distribution commissions, you might use distribution partners like Instacart, like DoorDash and others, and they usually charge commissions. So you will need to pay them 10-15%. Credit card transaction fees, usually 2-3%. And if you're a large company with multi-million dollar top line, 2-3% is a lot of costs. Discounts, they're not costs per se, but they behave like costs. And a lot of times you can find them on the income statement. And by changing your discount policy, you can improve your profits. Import-export duties might be not that applicable in this business, so I'll put a question mark here. So this is how it can look like. Again, feel free to use this as a flashcard. R&D expenses, in case they have their app to make pre-orders for their produce, that will be R&D expense. But if not, I will probably leave it out. I will put a question mark here. All right. I hope this makes sense. Can we add tariffs to variables? Yeah, you can add export import duties or tariffs, assuming if your a grocery chain is part of the international, they have like international supply chain. Sometimes you might use only local produce, and thus you won't need to pay tariffs. But if you are, then yeah, feel free to include that. All right, let's do a quick quiz and then we will debrief and take a 3-minute break. Please click the link in the chat. Let's give it a minute and then we will discuss. Awesome. Appreciate your responses. Fixed and variable, rent, maintenance, marketing. And so equipment, land are not fixed costs. They are CapEx, capital expenditure. If you want to include, for example, maintenance or rent, those will be costs. Maintenance, marketing, and salaries, that's great. Variable costs, terrific. Expert duties, labor commission, okay. Labor. Marketing is not a variable cost. Marketing is fixed. So maybe this is something we can quickly touch upon. So fixed costs, and this is just confusing term. It doesn't mean the costs are not changing. They can change. They can change a lot. Marketing can go up and down all the time. If you have a season, you will have high marketing expenses. If it's dead season like summer, you will have a marketing budgets. But it doesn't mean it's a variable cost. Variable costs are dependent on the volume sold. The more you sell, the more variable costs you will have. But with marketing, the more you sell, it doesn't affect marketing. Marketing budgets are subject to some other decision-making criteria. Now, sometimes people ask, why is not transportation variable? If we increase the scale of our business, transportation costs will go up. Well, if you increase the scale of your business, all the costs will go up because all the costs are variable in the long term from that perspective. Um, but I think what's helpful to mention here is that transportation costs are so-called step function. You use one truck and that's enough, and then you expand your business and you need another one, and then the third one. So you have those steps, and if steps are short, you can consider this as a variable cost as it behaves very much like a variable. But if steps are fairly long, then it's more fixed than variable. Same with labor. If you pay hourly labor, that's likely variable because the steps are very short. But if it's monthly pay, steps are longer, and you can consider that as a fixed cost. So it's flexible. You can change this to, but marketing is usually considered fixed. Yeah. All right. I hope this makes sense. Let's do a quick pause and take a 3-minute break. Feel free to use this opportunity to stretch, catch a breath, replenish your favorite beverage, and we will be back in 3 minutes.
Make it.
All right, welcome back. Let's dive into comparison. It's we're entering more challenging brainstorming questions. So it's gonna be content heavy. Comparison is when you need to compare several options or one option. Let's work with this example. So your client is a snack food company. They produce cookies and crackers, and right now they hire a contractor to distribute their products, which means that that contractor literally comes to their warehouses, gets the product, and then delivers that to some retailers like Target or Walmart and puts those products on the shelves. So that's the distribution function. Now, the client is considering to bring this distribution in-house and hire full-time workers to distribute their products. The question is, should they do that or not? So the way you can think about this type of questions is cost-benefit analysis. And you can think about financial, strategic benefits, and risk assessment. In terms of the financial, it's fairly straightforward. Usually candidates get it really on the fly. You need to compare potential CapEx implications. If we would like to bring this function in-house, we might need to have a fleet of trucks, potentially loading and uploading equipment, and that will require additional expense, additional CapEx. OpEx, both options have different cost structure, different fixed and different variable costs. If we work with our external provider, they have commission that they charge us. If we bring distribution in-house, we don't need to pay that commission, but we need to pay our employee salaries, maintenance, fuel for our trucks, etc. So the cost structure will be different. There might be potential impact on revenue. It's not um, explicit and kind of immediately obvious at the beginning. But if you think about it, if you have high quality distribution function, your shelves will be constantly full, your cookies would not be misplaced, and they will be in a good quality, not broken. But if your function is not working that well, you might be sold out, for example, or your cookies might be misplaced, and that will affect your revenue. In addition to financial, you want to explore non-financial aspects or strategic benefits. And this is the part where people get a little bit lost. You can talk about new opportunities, uh, operations, and customer experience. In terms of new opportunities, it's usually about access to. So if we work with this distribution company, we get access to new regions because they might have scale, they might be present across the country. And if we stop working with them, we might lose access to those regions because we're small and we might not be able to be present in those regions given that it's not economically viable. The opposite is also true. If we do it on our own, we have more flexibility and we can expand to any regions we want. And thus it will help us to reach to new customers. We might get access to best practices. The chances are our current partner has been doing this for years, if not decades. So they work with a lot of different clients, and over years they have accumulated a lot of best practices in terms of processes, in terms of systems, in terms of talent. So they know what they're doing. They have expertise, and we are going to build it from scratch. So we will lose access to those best practices. Potentially some partners if our let's say distribution the retail partners. Our current distributor might have exclusive agreements with specific retail chains, and if we stop working with them, we'll lose access to those retail partners. Operations, both options offer different capacity, different operational complexity. If we do it on our own, we're going to have new people, new processes, new system, operational complexity will increase, disruptions might potentially occur. If we keep it outsourced, we might not be worried about that because it's their headache. We might have different flexibility. If it's Christmas time, if it's some other holidays, we might need to wrap things up and be increase our capacity really quickly, and our partner might not be willing to do that. So quality might be different, as we discussed. Make sure that our shelves are constantly full of our cookies. They are not misplaced, and they are in a good condition, not broken. Customer experience will have direct access to our retailers and get direct feedback to understand how we can improve the process and maybe get some insight into customer behavior, which might help us change packaging, for example, different delivery time, different flexibility, different level of customization. All of that will be part of your strategic benefits. Finally, risk assessment. We discussed that in more detail at the beginning. In here, you can just suggest operational and financial. You can double click on that and explore specific risks to specific options. In general, you want to consider if we do that in-house, what operational risks we're facing. If we outsource, what operational risks we will have. All right, so this is how it looks like. A lot of ideas. You don't need this many. 4 is average. 7 would be top 5%. You have a structured approach. You don't need to do that. You can do lists, but list is not top-down. Consultants prefer top-down, so the best practice is to offer a structure. So this is how it can look like. Can feel free to take a note, take a screenshot, use that as a reference point and a flashcard. I would encourage you to practice comparison brainstorming questions because quite often candidates struggle a little bit and you might need to do a little bit of reps. Similar to what we did with risks, we went through the overview and you might have got the impression that yeah, it makes sense, but the moment you started working on that, all of a sudden it was a little bit more challenging than expected. All right, I hope this makes sense and we can move to the next topic, synergies. They don't occur that often, mostly in an M&A case, and you will be asked, what synergies should we expect from acquiring this target? Usually candidates understand synergies, but they can't articulate them. And it doesn't sound too well thought through. So let's go through several categories of synergies, and I will try to articulate them the way I would encourage you to put it in your case. So there are 4 categories of synergies. We can start with cost synergies. They are the most important ones because you have full control over your costs, and the chances that you will capture cost synergies are the highest in comparison with other synergies. Out of all of this, I would recommend to focus on 4. First, decrease in overhead costs. Why? Because if you consolidate your overhead, your central services like HR, IT, marketing, finance, you will be able to reduce duplicative functions. You don't need to have double functions. You can consolidate them and maybe increase utilization rate of some of your personnel and thus let go the others. And that's the first suspect for cost synergies when you do an acquisition. The second one is raw materials. If you consolidate your procurement of both companies, you might see that there are overlaps in the procurement, and thus you can get volume discounts for that supply, and you have negotiation power. So especially that is very pronounced when you have a horizontal expansion, when you have direct competitor. For example, one grocery chain acquires the other grocery chain, and you are going to become a larger player in the grocery chain space. What happens? You have a larger procurement for all kind of produce, all kind of prepackaged food. And when you go to negotiations with your vendors, you have now more bargaining power because you bring more business to them. So that will give you volume discount. That's number two. Number three is consolidation of manufacturing facilities, consolidation of warehouses or any other infrastructure. Um, and you might free up some unnecessary one after that consolidation. And finally, consolidation of transportation, especially if geographical footprint of both companies overlap. So you can consolidate the transportation, that overlapping piece, to optimize routes and reduce unnecessary fleet and driver headcount. So whenever you present cost synergies, I would encourage you to use the word consolidation of. It helps tremendously to put you in the right headspace. Sometimes candidates will say, sure, cost synergies, raw materials. Okay, but can you elaborate? And this is the part where people can do it. They kind of understand it, but kind of not. And so when you say consolidation of procurement, that helps you to start unpacking it. We will consolidate procurement, we will have higher volume, thus higher bargaining power. We will be able to demand volume discounts. And so you will be able, with higher chance, you will be able to explain what that implies. That's cost synergies. The second type of synergies is revenue synergies. Uh, they are less pronounced because you don't have full control over your revenue. Market determines a lot of what will happen. But some revenue synergies that you can highlight. First, cross-selling. When Amazon acquired Whole Foods, they started selling Whole Foods products at Amazon's platform. And so that revenue stream wasn't there before. It's a brand new revenue stream. And that's additional revenue for this consolidation, this M&A unlocked. Um, that's why it's a synergy and cross-selling. Sometimes uh, candidates say, right, but we have sales, they have sales, we consolidate, and we have more sales. Our market share increases, or we have access to different customer groups. All right, but where is that incremental additional revenue? And this is where to start kind of being a little bit uncomfortable. So yeah, so make sure you know how to explain that cross-selling aspect, that now we will be able to sell the products of our target to the client base of the acquiring company and vice versa. Accelerated geographical expansion. If your target is not present in the regions that you are, that give potential. There is potential for a new revenue synergy, as now you can leverage your existing infrastructure, you can leverage your market intelligence to help your target expand in those regions at a faster pace and smoother without making mistakes you made in the past. It's not cross-selling, as you're not going to sell to your client base. You're going to help them find their own clients in that new region, and your role is just to accelerate their entrance and make it more successful. Sometimes you have more bundling options, especially if it's similar um, industries. Like McDonald's recently entered the strategic partnership with the Krispy Kreme, and now they offer Krispy Kreme donuts in McDonald's, and you potentially will see soon some bundle options with their burgers. More pricing power that happens when you have horizontal expansion, when uh, Verizon and Sprint or T-Mobile and Sprint, they consolidated, and now you have a larger market share, and in some regions you have a dominant position, so customers don't have a lot of options to go to, and they will most likely go to you. So now you have pricing power, and you can increase prices. That's a tricky one because you might cross the line and violate antitrust regulation, and that might cause some trouble. There are some other synergies here, revenue synergies, but they are more talking points rather than explicit revenue synergies. So I would try to focus on these four on the top. All right, so that's revenue. And usually it's enough. You can focus on cost synergies, revenue synergies, and that will be your answer. But if you feel like you need more ideas, you can talk about other synergies, balance sheet synergies and knowledge synergies. Balance sheet synergies do not affect your profits, do not affect revenue, do not affect costs. For example, you will get access to more financial resources, to larger loans, to larger funding, because now you're bigger and more banks will be willing to work with you. You will be able to consolidate CapEx programs. Usually large companies, they have multi-year investment programs to purchase new equipment, start new production line, build new warehouse. And now you can consolidate those plans and see that they might have overlapped somewhere, or you might now not need this new warehouse because you can leverage the warehouse of your target. That will help you save some cash investment and reallocate it to something else. That would not change your profits. It will improve your cash flow. You can renegotiate your payment terms with suppliers. And because now you're bigger, you can ensure that you pay your bills within 60 days, not 30 days. And that will give you more cash and improve your cash flow. So those are some examples of balance sheet synergies. Knowledge synergies is probably the weakest one. It's consolidation of your IP, your talent, your best practices, and arguably that might help you to be more innovative and come up with new product offerings, or maybe optimize your operational processes because now you have more best practices that you can apply. But in reality, it doesn't often end up that way. It's just a good story to have, but it's usually not too feasible, not too implementable. All right, so those were synergies. It's one of those more complicated brainstorming questions. So I would encourage you to take notes, revisit that, and make sure you did some practice because it's a little bit challenging to reproduce all of that when you are under pressure. Fantastic. And then the final type of synergy is brainstorming is profit growth ideas. It's very straightforward. You will be asked about your thoughts on how we can increase profits in this case. And the way you can address it, you can combine revenue growth ideas, 4Ps, with key cost items, fixed variable cost, and see how we can reduce costs. And if we take this example of Spanish low-cost airline that has been experiencing declining profitability, and if you think about how we can help this airline to grow their profits, you can grow their sales, you can decrease their costs, or you can focus on some high margin aspects of their business, high margin routes, high margin customer groups, or you can discontinue unprofitable or low margin routes or stop serving some or prioritizing in your marketing some groups like students that are low margin. All right, so those are 6 major brainstorming questions. If you get familiar with them and feel strong about it, you will save yourself a lot of trouble. You will be far more confident with brainstorming questions and will be able to work on more atypical ones that are a bit more challenging. That concludes this webinar. I hope this was helpful. Before you go, please click the link in the chat to share what you learned today and what is still a little bit confusing. It helps me tremendously to improve this experience for future generations. So I would appreciate your input. I'm going to stick around in case you have any questions about this webinar, about cases in general, consulting career, resume, networking, anything that you have burning questions about. Happy to address those. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. See you on Wednesday when we will talk about storytelling.